Well, folks, this is it. The crew has arrived in Demon World number 1, and Dragon Ball Daima episode 15 begins the countdown to the big finale. This episode is called Third Eye, which is in reference to the legendary demonic Third Eye that was discussed all the way back in episode 1 of Daima, an ancient artifact from the Demon Realm that Gomah's been wanting, that has been missing for many, many years since the days of the reign of Dabura's father in the Demon Realm. We've been talking a lot about the Third Eye on videos and of course in streams. If you are catching up with Daima now, I have an entire series of breakdown videos here on the channel, breaking down all the lore, things you missed, Easter eggs, and secret backstory references to every single episode of Daima, as well as, of course, reviews for every episode here on the channel. But yeah, there's been a lot of discussion about the importance of that artifact in the climax of this story. We've talked a little bit about the kind of power that it grants you. This episode really does lay the foundation for all of that by telling us much more about the Third Eye, something we've only heard a little bit about up until this point. If you remember, Hybis found the Third Eye. He found an eye, playfully enough, just somewhere next to a mountain. And I think that was revealed back sometime around episode 9-ish. I think it was episode 9. But now, all the players are together in Demon World 1. The 3 Dragon Balls are there. Dr. Arinsu and her guys, Gomah, and of course Goku and the gang. And I want to remind you that we did see Dabura for a brief second in last week's next episode preview. So when I saw that, the first thing I thought of was, yep, flashback. So they really got to tell us about this thing and lay the groundwork for things to come in the next few weeks. I saw some people arguing about which episode was more boring, 13 or 14, and I liked 14 a bit more. The good news is that with episode 15, it's definitely not boring. There's a lot of action in this episode from start to finish. I mean, there's a lot of action and a little bit of lore involving a flashback telling us more about the Third Eye. But if you're waiting for like a lot of action, this was definitely the episode. However, there were a couple of problems I had with this episode. There's a couple of issues I had that really did bug me. Like, I enjoyed it for the most part, but there were a couple things that I thought maybe weren't very well thought out, and I'm going to go into that here with this review. So, as you remember before, everyone comes down to Demon World 1 using the original, tunnel, right, between the Demon Worlds, and they get attacked by Gomah's army. This whole episode was pretty much all-out war, because all of the remaining people in the Demon Realm that were part of the military police, Gomah's defense forces in that Demon Realm, they're going up against everyone. So they go behind these mountains and they're getting blasted. Now, at one point in the episode, actually it happened a couple times, Goku gets hit by one of their blasts and he goes down, like an electrocution, like he goes down like shocked. And actually in the same episode, Vegeta goes down. You know, a little bit after this, a very similar sequence, Vegeta goes down, Goku has to give him one of those revive bugs that works like a Senzu. Now, I find it really, really strange that Goku and Vegeta, who fought Tamagami 3 and Tamagami 2, which it was told to us multiple times that at the current power level of Gomah and them, he could not defeat the Tamagamis. That's what's been told to us, you know, going back several episodes. So it's weird that Gomah has these guys that have weapons that hurt Goku and Vegeta, but couldn't he have used that against the Tamagami? Now, let me just say this. It could be possible that maybe the Tamagamis are immune to it, because look at the Tamagamis. They're clearly not made up of organic tissue. They're kind of like mechs. They seem to be sort of like automatrons. You know what I mean? They're like sort of these living machines, right? So it could be that it doesn't affect them, but it certainly affected Goku and Vegeta. So I can kind of get past that detail, but there's something else that I didn't like, and I'm going to get to it here in just a moment. But I did want to say that basically it's a big firefight for the first few scenes of the episode. You've got Glorio and Pansy with their guns, like firing, at the military police. They've got ships coming in. It's a bunch of. They got guys with like hand rifles, and then you've got like the ships, and then you've got Goku, Vegeta, Piccolo. Anybody who is good at using ki were kind of using these long range ki attacks. Now the animation and the colors were beautiful. I mean, I know that goes without saying. Dragon Ball Daima has such fluid animation, and every time that I see it, I think to myself how incredible Super would have been if they had this consistently. We saw a lot of fluid animation in Super in some of the big fights at the Goku Black episodes where he fought Vegito, and even some of the ones before that, and of course during the big Jiren fights. But I would have loved it if they had this type of, just beautiful movement throughout that series. So, we see all that. They're fighting through them. And then while all this is going on, Gomah notices that Hybis has the third eye, which is something that I knew was going to happen, that at some point he would see that the third eye is right there in his possession. And he gets excited, and that sort of leads into the flashback where we see Dabura and we see Demon King Abura. Now, obviously, I've talked about this before, but it's a big pun. Abura, Dabura, abracadabra. That's the pun. People say Dabura because that's kind of like the Funimation pronunciation, but it's supposed to be Dabura. That's how they pronounce it in Japanese. So it's Dabura. But I'll go more into that in the breakdown. Also, the backstory of the third eye is revealed, and we find out kind of what happened, like how the third eye wound up getting lost from Demon World 1 going into Demon World 3, like what happened. And I will tell you this, I'm going to go into a lot more detail on this in the breakdown, because some of the imagery here was straight out of Dragon Quest. I mean, I've talked about it before a little bit, but I saw things here where I legitimately thought I was watching Dragon Quest, or playing Dragon Quest, that is, the video games. A lot of stuff. Like, there were a lot of... Toriyama definitely references other works. Besides Dragon Quest, there was also some Sandland references that I wanted to talk about. But basically, it becomes this big firefight, and they actually end up making it to the palace. But then everyone gets put on high alert, like the Guardians, and we have more of this fight. What ends up happening is during this scuffle, the palace reveals that it has these giant tanks, these big giant tanks in Demon World 1. And with these giant tanks, this right here was straight out of Sandland. I don't know how many of you have read Sandland or if you've seen the anime. I believe there are episodes on Hulu right now streaming. Sandland was not produced by Toei Animation. It was produced by Toho, but it was executive produced by Akio Iyoku, the same one that's kind of running Dragon Ball's anime behind the scenes. Iyoku has a much more powerful presence, in the behind the scenes with Toriyama than people realize, because he also helped out with the Dragon Quest games. He's sort of like, before Toriyama passed, in many ways, he was like the gateway between everybody else and Toriyama. So instead of being Akira Toriyama getting 50,000 emails a day probably from people wanting to work with you, Akio would be the guy to kind of funnel it through, and his assistants. I don't know if I've talked about that before, but point is that there's a lot of stuff, and if you're unfamiliar with these things, I'll go into it in the breakdown. And when I'm watching this, I'm enjoying the action. I like the action, but I'm scratching my head because here we have Goku, a kid who at one point took out the entire Red Ribbon Army by himself. Obviously, these guys are more powerful because they have magic-based weapons, but he did it by himself, and we see a lot of homages to that here, like with the power pole, like he uses it like as a giant bat to just whack people away, and I love that. Then we've got Vegeta, who most of his life worked for Frieza alongside Nappa, battling these different planets they were going to take over for the Empire. And he had to most likely fight various armies in his life. So these guys are combat experienced going back decades, and they're having a hard time with these tanks. And I didn't like that. While I'm watching it, I'm like, why don't you guys just go Super Saiyan? Like, why don't you just go Super Saiyan and just finish this? It really reminded me of some of my criticisms about the Giants episode and how things could have been resolved easier and faster, in that way. And so I think, that type of shit bothered me. Now, I'm going to go back and rewatch the episode to see if maybe there was an explanation that I missed before I do my breakdown. But I really did not like the fact that they're having a hard time when they could just go Super Saiyan. It would enhance their power, their speed, and everything, and they should be able to take everybody out. So during this big battle at like the palace, we then have a moment that I thought was very much like Lord of the Rings, the films, or like the MCU, where there's a big blast that's about to hit Goku and them, and suddenly out of nowhere, bam, here comes Pansy's dad, King Kadan from Demon World 3. He finally made it there, and so he brings his reinforcements, and now it becomes this big sort of back and forth fight. Now Goku goes Super Saiyan. So I'm very mixed on this, because while I enjoyed the fight, I like sort of the two different armies fighting. It's something different that we don't really see much of in Dragon Ball. Like, we really don't. There are some flashback scenes to stuff that happened on Planet Vegeta, very briefly, and there's a few scenes here and there, but most of the time we just see like any army, whether it be the Red Ribbon or even the Army of the Earth, going against some kind of like superhuman. For example, when Cell fought the armies of the Earth in Dragon Ball Z before the Cell games. That's one example right there. Here, it's like army against army, and I really like that, because again, it's not something we see a lot from Dragon Ball, but in the back of my head, my suspension of disbelief was kind of hurt, because these guys, we know that Goku can do Super Saiyan 3. We've seen Vegeta do it a couple episodes ago. 3 episodes ago. You would think that they would just bust that out and away we go. But finally Goku goes Super Saiyan, and they are able to overcome Gomah's forces. There was nothing really in this episode there was some brief stuff, but no storyline progression with Majin Ku, Majin Du, and the counterfeit Ginyu Force. It looks like that's being saved for next week. But the resolution here is that King Kadan has come to help them out, which I do like that. Like, I do like that he actually has a place here in the big finale, and I did like that most of the episode was very action-based. But like I said, there were just things that bugged me because they were weird and kind of dumb, and I don't think they were very well thought out. Dragon Ball Daima really has to stick the landing here. I will say that if it doesn't, like if the next 5 episodes don't produce, high quality, Daima, I think, will be seen as sort of a waste of time, or not entirely, but like it'll be seen as a letdown. I know for some people it already is. I know others aren't into it. Others love it. Everyone has a different opinion on it. It's not universally beloved like, say, Dragon Ball Super Broly, which only a small amount of people didn't like. Most fans that I know in various different languages, not just people in the West, really enjoyed that film. So that's been the closest they've gotten to like getting just universal appraisal. But for this, I think they really need to stick the landing, and they need to stick it well. Now, the other thing that I thought was a big disappointment that I did not like was what Hybis did with the third eye. So at one point, this Majin, this demon chick, shows up with this big-ass hat. Now, I've seen Hybis with the hat on going all the way back to September when I saw like some behind-the-scenes documents, but I wasn't sure what the context was of those because it was so long ago I had forgotten all about it. And basically, he trades the third eye for the hat. Now, I understand that Hybis' character is that he's kind of an airhead, he's not very smart, and he certainly has no idea about the power of the third eye. We see in the flashback, in the one that happened earlier in the episode with the lore, that he found it. Like, we actually see him finding it. So look, I get it. The character's dumb. I get it. He's an airhead. We've seen other characters that are just like this, especially if if you're somebody who's only seen DBZ and you've never really looked into other Toriyama works, it might rub you the wrong way even more. But if you look at Dr. Slump and other things, Toriyama often writes these like sort of dumb characters that are like maybe funny, but they're a little too dumb for their own good. But the reason why I was let down by this is because I was really hoping that there would be some kind of a hostage situation where we see Gomah's cunningness. We see Gomah as a strategist, instead of a goofball, actually find a way to get that eye away from Hibis, whether it be by kidnapping him or whether it be by threatening to kill him if he doesn't turn it over. Something that sort of felt a bit more dramatic than him just trading the eye over. You know, I'm in a weird spot here because I'm somebody who really does understand like Toriyama's sense of humor because I've read so much of his work, but I feel like with Daima there might be a bit too much of it. You know what I mean? Like I don't mind it necessarily as kind of a way to, you know, lighten things up a bit in some parts of the series and not make it too dark, but I do feel like there were missed opportunities here. You know, that would have been, I think, a great moment to show how ruthless and how cunning and how desperate Gomah is to get the third eye, and that he's not someone that they should be playing around with. Obviously, it was confirmed in this episode that the third eye grants the Demon Kings throughout history great power, increases their size, just allows them to be incredibly strong. And that was something we kind of already expected, but it was told to us here. Now, what I did not expect was that Dabura was trying to take the third eye for himself to overthrow his own father, Abura. That was something that was new information in this episode that I did not know about and wasn't expecting at all. So it seems like these Demon Kings are kind of like Sith Lords, where they'll be the apprentice for a while, even if it's family, and eventually the thirst for power overwhelms them and they want to betray, you know, the predecessor. Dabura is the reason why the thing got lost in the first place. This episode, I thought, while it was, in my opinion, bit less boring than episode 13 and 14, there are things about the story that bugged me. I've pointed out in the review. Very disappointing, you know, aspects of this episode. Overall, it just, to me, it's not the worst episode of Daima. It's probably in my bottom 5. Daima has to stick the landing with these last 5 episodes starting next week, because these last 3 have left a lot to be desired. Remember to come back tomorrow for the breakdown, where I'm going to go into really explicit detail about the third eye, the Dragon Quest Sandland connection, and more. Thank you for your support. Take care of yourself. See you guys tomorrow.